When I first heard about, the idea of short-term rentals as an investment strategy in real estate, I was kind of adverse to it. And for me, I was adverse to it because I really had to get over this idea that somebody else was going to be in my house.
Welcome to STR Unlocked, a podcast for driven vacation rental investors looking to gain the freedom that comes with an abundance of time and money.
I'm April.
And I'm Nathan.
Our life is busy with 3 small children, full-time jobs, and not nearly enough coffee. And we're unlocking success with short-term rental investing every single day. Join us in our journey as we learn and grow together.
If we can do it, so can you.
Hey guys, welcome to the first episode of STR Unlocked. I am Nathan Whitworth, owner of Crossgate Realty Media, based here in Greenville, South Carolina, and I'm here with my stunningly beautiful wife, April.
You're awesome. Hey guys.
So we're excited to be doing this. This is the first episode, and this is kind of something that I've had in the back of my mind for like 6 months now.
It's been longer than that. I'm pretty sure it's been longer than that.
Yeah. Well, it feels like it's been forever, to be honest. We've actually tried to set this up, and we've tried to actually do our first podcast probably like 2, 3, 4 times now. And every single time I'm getting more and more frustrated when we can't actually do it. So I'm excited that we actually click and record and we're able to get this going. Hopefully the 3 kids that we have upstairs stay asleep the whole time.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. So we actually wanted to make this podcast for you for really several different reasons. The first one is, if you're anything like us, you're probably a short-term rental investor who is gobbling up information right now. Like, you're trying to figure it out. You're probably in a spot where, you really want to see your small business, your short-term rental succeed in a very, very big way. If you're like us, you're probably investors who are trying to scale rather quickly, or at least as quickly as you possibly can, because you kind of see a pathway to making this a business in and of itself that can kind of get you out of the thing that you're doing day to day and living off of your real estate investments. And that was kind of a big driver for us. So
for sure.
If that's you found the right place. We're not here to really share anything as experts. We're just really here to share what we've learned so far. What we can guarantee you is that while we may not have all the answers, we have learned a lot. And we're here to share what those things are with you. So hopefully over time, you'll find this podcast valuable. You'll think that this will be a place where you can kind of come back to and come be a part of our community that we're going to start working to build. So we figured the first 3 episodes here are actually going to be about our story. And not that we expect anybody to be really all that interested in our story, but it's a good way to get started, just to kind of open the doors and just kind of share with you who we are and what our path has been to get to this point, which is having our first short-term rental in the mountains of Tennessee, in Gatlinburg, actually.
Yeah. So we have a lot to learn. We hopefully will have a lot of really great guests on our show, so that not only will we be able to learn, but you guys will be right alongside us learning as well. So, yeah.
So let's go ahead and go back to a little bit of the beginning and how we kind of got interested in real estate. So I was actually a high school educator for 10 years. I taught high school music. And April's really worked for most of her life as a project manager for a software company. And we really, about the end of about 10 years of teaching, I got to the point where I'll never forget, I came in after a day at school, and I looked at my son, and at that point we had our first son. And to be honest with you, I didn't even recognize his face. I mean, I was working a job where I had to spend a lot of hours at the school. We were doing a lot, and it was very impactful work. It was something that I felt really good about, and I really felt like I was making a difference in the lives of the community. And we did. We built something that was really incredible there in the community. But it was really funny because I kind of came to this realization that no matter how much time or no matter how much effort, while it was helping others, which is amazing, and that was a great way to spend the first 10 years of my life, it really wasn't helping my family a whole lot. No matter how much effort, no matter how much time, and I put into that to continue to grow those programs in the community, my family was always going to kind of suffer the consequences of me being away and me having to spend my time doing those things. And I really wanted to turn my attention inward towards my family and looking on how can we kind of, as our family was growing, we had our first son, as our family was growing, what are the things that we can be doing to kind of building our own future internally for the family? So I ended up leaving teaching. And it was at that point that I got into the idea of like wanting to build my own business. I had always had a passion for photography, so I ended up going into wedding photography. So like I was spending my time in 2019, 2020 and building a what is now a really successful wedding photography business, something that I'm very proud of. And so fast forward a little ways, the pandemic happened. Really all of the business that I had for the wedding photography studio, nobody really canceled. So I was very fortunate. It's just that weddings just got postponed. And so I was kind of sitting there twiddling my thumbs a little bit, ended up starting a new business called Crossgate Realty Media, which focused on, it was basically a real estate marketing company is what I started. And I've had a lot of fun with that for the past couple of years, but that's what kind of started drawing my interest into real estate. Because of the time I was spending with brokers and the time I was spending with agents, I started kind of overhearing a lot of their conversations. It was probably one of like Brandon Turner's webinars. There was like a million of them going on at the time at the beginning of the pandemic. I got really into the Bigger Pockets community. I started listening to him and David Green. And it was like, this was before I had really started talking to you, April, about really any of the real estate stuff. Like we hadn't really, I'd never really brought up the idea of like, hey, like what would it be like to have another mortgage? like what would it be like if we owned more than one house? You know, some of those really weird, awkward kind of life-changing conversations, you know, every couple has when one of them comes to the table with the idea of being a real estate investor. So anyway, it was maybe another couple of months. And, you know, I was listening to the podcast, Bigger Pockets, and I had heard for the last time, you've got to read Rich Dad Poor Dad. It was like, I had heard it at that point 1,000 times in the podcast. Everybody said, you got to read this book. You got to read this book. So finally I bought the book. And I'll never forget, like I got to the part where it was talking about the exchanges, the 1039 exchanges, 1031 exchange. Yeah. 1031 exchanges in the book. And we were upstairs with the boys. We have 3 sons. We were all in the room together. It was like really shortly. No, it was right before our 3rd son was born, because he's now about 9 months old. And I had gotten to the point about 1031 exchanges in the book. And I just like looked up and I like looked at April. I was like, you should read this. I wasn't even done.
Stop suggesting for about 6 months before I finally picked it up.
Yeah, it was a lot. I was like, you should really, really read this, because that book, you know, is just what everybody says. It's transformational. I mean, it really makes you think. And a part of the challenge that I had been facing at that point was that I had been coming to the grips. I was building a great wedding photography business, but I had been coming kind of to the grips with the realization that although I was making more money doing that, way more money doing that than I was teaching, I'm still in the habit of trading time for money, right? Like if I stopped going to weddings, if I stopped photographing people, and there's things that you could do like to get, but for the most part, if the camera was not in my hands, I was not making money. And the pandemic was what kind of like threw that in my face in a very big way. Like I was like, okay, so if I'm not able to go to weddings and I'm not able to do this, you know, and it's only like you can only scale that so much realistically. And there's companies who can do that, like there's ways to do it, but it just wasn't something I was interested in the wedding space. So then I started looking around and I started thinking to myself, like, what can we do? Like what are ways that we can be smart with the money that we have and the resources that we have to start to actually make a really positive impact for our family and for our family's future? And that's when Rich Dad Poor Dad came at the right time. And then we started having that conversation. So what did you think? Like, I'm just curious, like, what did you think when you started? Because you did read the book. You read Rich Dad Poor Dad, but it was a while after.
I read that book after we had our first property under contract.
Yeah, yeah.
I really went on faith. I mean, most of the time,
Sucker.
Yeah, most of the time when Nathan has an idea, it's normally a very monumental, like it's going to change our life, right? Like I'm going to quit teaching. I'm going to start a photography business. You know, I'm really happy with photography stuff, but now like we're gonna buy a rental. We're gonna do this, and I mean, it really was life changing. And I will say the book is totally worth a read for anybody who hasn't read it yet. But yeah, it was kind of a shock to the system. Being able to get a rental and kind of go through that process, it was very eye-opening, and we're ready to do it again.
Yeah, it was really interesting because right at that time we put our first long-term rental under contract, And we had kind of started the process on that. And then what was really interesting is we were about to go like balls to the wall, like putting boots on the ground, doing like driving for dollars, like having a crew. Like we were planning on putting like 2 people out in the field to start looking around at neighborhoods and to start the process of bringing in leads and actually basically turning this into a full-blown burr operation. Like we were just going to do that in our local market. And here in Greenville, South Carolina, it's like a great place. Like it would have been very successful for sure. And I don't know what happened. It was like we got started. We were interviewing people to like do the driving for dollars for us and to start that business and to start the systems for that business, which we were hoping to be a very successful and scalable business. And I honestly don't remember the first time that short-term rentals came into my consciousness. Like I don't remember.
It was probably a podcast.
It was probably a podcast.
It was probably a Bigger Pockets podcast. Honestly, I can't remember exactly which one it was. We probably need to go back and figure out what it was since it got us started. But it was one of those things where we were listening to the podcast. We were completely set on doing burrs. We were going to do long-term rentals. We had already gotten one of our long-term rentals, and our next step was to do the burrs. And then we kind of looked at each other after that episode. And I think that maybe you had listened to it first and you were like, hey, like you really need to listen to this episode. This was a really great episode. And then we just kind of started looking around, and we had initially were planning on only spending a little bit of money, trying to go for those really cheap properties. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. We were trying to go for those really cheap properties so we could burr, and then do some cash out refinance and try to get most of our money back. And at the point where we were looking at those long-term rentals, we were looking at using a HELOC to be able to do that. And then it kind of occurred to us that we could potentially use that HELOC for a down payment on a short-term rental. And that kind of got us started. And then we did lots and lots of research and figured out how to do it.
Yeah. And it's really funny because I remember the first time that, because we're like always interested in different business ideas. And one of the ideas that we had was to basically Airbnb. You remember when I went through that phase of like wanting to camp a lot?
Oh yeah.
And I was like, yeah, we should
bought
buy
a camper.
I was like, we even bought a camper. We flipped a camper actually. So like that's another story. But like, I've always been really interested in the idea of like, hey, let's buy something that we can use, but have somebody else pay for it. And that's always been kind of in my wheelhouse of tricks, I guess. And we were like very serious for a little while about buying an RV. And there's actually websites kind of like Airbnb. There's Airbnbs for RVs. That's kind of like specially dedicated to RVs, so that you could like throw it up there and then people can come and pick up your RV and actually use it for a week or whatever and bring it back. And I was thinking about doing that to be able to essentially pay for the RV. We ended up not doing that. And it's funny because when I first heard about, the idea of short-term rentals as an investment strategy in real estate, I was kind of adverse to it. And for me, I was adverse to it because I really had to get over this idea that somebody else was going to be in my house, right? Like it's weird because like when you're thinking about short-term rentals, like for me, you're probably more even approach than I am. But like for me, I'm kind of like a very passionate, like my emotions kind of lead the way in a lot of cases. And when I was first thinking about short-term rentals, I was like, oh my God, like I would love to have a house that we could go and we could like take the kids to, and we could like build family history and traditions and all that kind of stuff. And that's still in our mind, right? For sure. But for me, I just had to like shift it from this idea of, oh man, there's gonna be like different people in my house every week, to no, like this is a business, right? Like this isn't our home. This is just a house. This is an asset that we own that other people are allowed to stay in. And then like over time, that started shifting and morphing kind of into this other idea, which is something that we're very passionate about. We love travel. Love travel. Like if you and I could do something for like the rest of our life, if we didn't have the kids, they weren't tied down and all that kind of stuff, like we would probably be traveling all the time, especially now that we can all the time.
Absolutely.
Like we wouldn't stay in one place. We'd probably bounce from Airbnb to Airbnb across the country, and that's how we'd live our life. But
that's still going to happen
eventually. Yeah. But for me, it was very difficult to like get past this thing of, well, we're going to have strangers who aren't going to respect our things as much as, and aren't going to take care of our things as much as we would take care of them. Like that was a very big hurdle for me to get over. And I remember, and I don't remember, I wish I could give credit to like who I heard say these things. But I just remember hearing a podcast where somebody actually kind of spoke to that. And somebody said, you have to think of it like a business that you own, because it's a hospitality business that you own. And it kind of just think of it as a hotel that you just happen to own that hotel or whatever, that small hotel. And when I made that switch into my mind, I was like, okay. And I think that's what kind of allowed me to kind of think a little bit more seriously about short-term rentals. And then we started looking at the numbers, and then we started looking at the cash flow. Cause like that was the other thing.
Yeah.
Like when I realized, cause for our long-term rental, we're making like a couple of $100 a month, right? In net profit. And that's not an awesome return.
It could be better.
It could be better. It could be better. But like, when I started looking at the possibilities of a short-term rental and the kind of cash flow, it really was what I kept hearing. And I started like seeing the evidence for myself that a short-term rental strategy in real estate investing can really supercharge your growth and how fast you end up moving, simply because you're able to, if you buy right, and those are things that we'll talk about later, but like if you buy right, like you're able to basically have all the benefits of those long-term rentals, plus the ability to get back your money quicker and then reissue your capital all over again faster and faster and faster and faster. And essentially, in many cases, maybe possibly, and we'll talk about this more, but without the headache of having to go through BRRRRs, having to do the remodels, which for us would have been like really new ground and something that we're not super comfortable with. Like I'm not super handy of a guy, right? And like we haven't really done that, any remodels at any of our houses. So like It just would have been very new territory for us. So
although honestly, all of this is new territory. So we're learning everything as we go. We've gotten very, we're starting to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. But yeah, there's a lot of uncomfortableness that we're still working through. So
for sure. So that's basically getting us from the kind of a little bit of our backstory, where we came from, how we've kind of been working our way up to our first short-term rental. I'm gonna kind of get straight to the punchline here, just to let everybody know at the end of the first episode that it really has been going great. Like it was it's way more of a job than most people will tell you it is. If you're hearing that it's passive income, somebody's lying to you. It's not passive. However, the amount of time that you spend on it, once you get it up and running and once you got the systems in place, and like how many hours a week do you think you spend on it?
Right now I probably spend about 5 hours a week.
So
now in the very beginning, that was a lot more. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. And really it can be more passive than what we are currently making it. But the fact is we're self-managing, right? So if you wanted to actually have it be more passive and you didn't have a whole lot of time and you just wanted to buy it and basically use it and reap the benefits, you certainly can. But you're probably going to need to have somebody managing it for you, because you can't just set it and forget it. I don't care how many different programs that you use. It's not one of those things that if you want to be successful, you can't just set it and forget it and just kind of expect it to roll in.
Yeah. And if you're listening to this, you're probably like us, which like we're investors who are trying to maximize the profits that we can make, right? Like we're working. The reason why we're taking on all the management ourselves is because we're wanting to not give away the 15, 20% in most cases to a management company for a short-term rental. We're wanting to keep all that ourselves so that we can deploy that capital again for the next one as soon as we possibly can. And I feel like that's what a lot of the investors in the community, that's not to say that every investor is that way. I mean, there's plenty of investors who just are happy with, the 15% or 10% cash on cash return for the short-term rental, and they can use it for a little while and they deploy a management company. That's one of the cool things about real estate that I've really come to appreciate, is that, man, everybody's situation is a little bit different. Like our situation is that we're working to really grow, learn as much as we possibly can, as fast as we possibly can, and grow, and have this be a way to really create generational wealth for our family. And that's our strategy. That's what our end goal is, and there's lots of other investors who aren't, like, they're perfectly happy to take a smaller return on their investment just to kind of hedge inflation, for instance, and just to have a more stable vehicle for investing rather than sticking their money in the stock market or anything else. They choose to kind of specialize in real estate and to go that route because really historically in every shape, form, and fashion, it is probably one of the more stable and profitable, investments that you possibly can have. So with all that being said, that's the end of our first episode. Hopefully you enjoyed a little bit. So this episode number 2, we're actually going to talk about, like, once we made the decision to go into our first short-term rental, that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk a little bit about the process that we went through. Because that was a journey in and of itself.
Sure.
We'll talk about the help that we had from several businesses that are in the short-term rental space as far as finding that first property. We'll kind of talk about our experience there. And then the third episode is actually going to be like getting the thing up and running. Just so you know, we ended up buying a new construction cabin in Gatlinburg, which we felt like at the time was going to be basically the least risky prospect that we had kind of in front of us. And in a lot of ways, it really has worked out to our favor for sure. Just to give you kind of a heads up, or just a little bit of an inside track into like what we have going on. What's our occupancy for July? It's July right now. What's our occupancy for July?
July right now is at 96%, I believe.
Yeah. So like as far as bookings go, like it's going really pretty well. And I think we're looking at making somewhere around 25,000 for this month.
Yep.
Yeah.
We're on track for 25.
So, I mean, like we're doing really well. We're very happy with how the rental is performing, but it wasn't that way like 4 months ago. And we're going to talk about that in the next few episodes. 4 months ago, we were very worried. Like we were very concerned. And if you're an investor in the short-term rental space, you were probably seeing all the posts in the Facebook groups and everybody was getting very concerned, because bookings were not coming in and it was kind of a strange time. So we really adjusted our strategy, which we'll talk about next time. We adjusted our strategy to something that we have found to be very, very successful and has helped us really kind of pull those bookings in and start making the money that we were hoping to make. So
absolutely.
Anyway, guys, we hope that you enjoyed it, learning a little about our backstory. This podcast is going to be both informational. We're going to be telling you about the things that we've learned in our journey so far, but we're also working to bring on a really interesting guest who can give us their perspective. People who, both other investors who have been very successful in the short-term rental space, but also others that you might have seen around our communities, the people who have been at this for quite some time and definitely have some knowledge they can pass on. Hopefully you enjoyed your time here with us today. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again next time.
Bye.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening. Hopefully this was really helpful to you in your journey of building a business. If you like what you heard, please click subscribe and go to iTunes and give us a rating. That helps us out tremendously when we're producing, hopefully, content of huge value to you. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it, and I hope that you have an amazing week. Go out there and crush it. I'll see you soon.